And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guests are Dan Baldwin and George Sewell, who will be discussing their research with Lindsay Higgins, whose story was the subject of the Netflix series Haunted, and their new book, Paranormal Pendulum 3. Guys, thank you for joining me today and welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Now, if you don't mind, can we start with pendulum dowsing? What is it and how did you get started in it?
Well, how I got started with it is a interesting story. I 20 years ago felt out of the blue a compelling urge to find missing children. It was just out of the blue. Don't know where it came from, but it was almost like a command. And I started hanging out with psychics I figured that was my best avenue to approach the problem. And one day I found somebody who was doing a pendulum dowsing, and I said, I can do that. And I picked it up and started, pretty much self-taught. And the basic principle is, your audience is familiar, I'm sure, with the old farmer with the witching stick out looking for water in the pasture. With the Y-shaped witching stick. The pendulum dowsing is the same principle, except I use a weight on a string. And you ask a question, a swing to the right would be a yes, a swing to the left would be a no. And how it works basically is the weight on the string occupies your conscious mind. So you're looking at that. That frees up your subconscious mind. And your subconscious mind is then free to contact, in our case, ETs or spirits, also the information that is out in the universe. And basically the information is downloaded into your subconscious. Your subconscious controls the muscles in your fingers that makes the rock on the string swing left or right.
Would you say that the part of you that's actually answering the question is your higher self and your body's just a conduit?
Exactly. Yeah. There's no magic whatsoever in the pendulum. It's a rock on a string. The magic, so to speak, is your subconscious in contact with your higher self. Absolutely.
Is there a skill level with it?
It's extremely easy to learn. I've got a couple of how-to books on it. You can pick it up in an afternoon. The only skill is in keeping your mind clear and not forcing the answer, because it's moved by your finger muscles, you can control the movement of the pendulum. You can make it say yes, you can say make it no. Am I going to win the lottery today? Yeah, wee. And in looking for missing children, it's like, is the 5-year-old little girl still alive? Yes. So the trick that you have to master is keeping your mind absolutely clear and focused, so that you don't force the answer. That's the only hard part. And like any other skill, the more you do that, the better you become at it.
George, are you also a dowser as well?
Yeah, having worked with Dan on getting information for his previous books, I need to do this too. Not nearly as proficient as Dan, but have some confidence in the outcomes.
Yeah, George is a good dowser.
Do you think it's better to be using a pendulum and dowsing than using a medium?
Well, we use both for this book.
Yeah.
Are either one of you mediums?
No, absolutely not. That's one good thing about the pendulum dowsing technique is anybody can pick it up. You don't have to have you don't have to be a clairaudient or clairsentient or clair this or clair that or clair the other. If you can hold a weight on a string, you can develop pendulum dowsing skills. It requires no real income to get involved with. You can get beautiful pendulums for under $20, or as I have done when I forgot my pendulums before. You can pick up a rock, cut a shoestring, tie them together. You've got a pendulum.
Do you think that using a pendulum is better than using a medium?
No. I mean, no. Is
two different approaches.
Yeah, is a trumpet better than a cornet?
Right.
Is an oil painting better than a photograph? They're two two different ways to get at the same answer. What George and I discovered, and I discovered even in looking for missing children, the more people you involve in the project, generally the better off you get. So we like working with mediums.
How successful were you at finding missing children?
I never did a percentage, but pretty good. I've written a number of books on the subject that outline some of our successes. I like to tell people that when I'm wrong, looking for a missing person, I am really wrong. I'm way off. When I'm cooking, I mean, I'm right on it.
Do you ever feel like you have to surrender to the technique and just trust the answers?
Yes, you have to. Yeah. Trust the fact that you're getting it, and realize sometimes you're going to get it wrong. Like it's like anything else. The best piano player in the world is going to hit a sour note every once in a while. It's the same thing with pendulum dowsing. So if you're working on an important case, or like especially like something like the Lindsay Higgins case, you do multiple sessions over and over and over. You ask the same question in different ways at different times of different people. So you're constantly double checking yourself.
Yeah, with different people holding the pendulum. Yeah,
for example, we'd be sitting around a table, and you're kind of worried, like, is the pendulum looking at is the medium looking at the pendulum and waiting for an answer, or is Dan looking at the medium trying to get the answer before he swings it? So, George and I would turn away from each other. We'd be working the pendulum, or me and the medium would look away from each other back to back, and George maybe would monitor to make sure that we weren't, I wasn't reading the medium or the medium wasn't reading the pendulum. And our accuracy was consistent.
So if you're contacting the spirit world using the pendulum, is it still a communication between your higher self and the being in the spiritual world that's still coming through you, and you're getting your answers with the pendulum?
Yeah, and one of the benefits of pendulum dowsing is that you can have extended conversations with the spirit world, as long as the spirit is willing to chat. So I'm sorry, I had to say that. As long as the spirit is willing to chat with you, you can continue the conversation. You're not waiting for the hair to raise up on your arm. You're not waiting to feel a cold spell. You're not waiting to get maybe one EVP or maybe a little knock on the wall or something like that. You can actually hold conversations, and I mean legitimate conversations. George and I held conversations with the spirits up to 20 minutes, I believe.
Now, is it possible that negative spirits can be coming through as well and just, causing trouble?
I'm sure they can. We've never run into that, never had that problem. Never in all my work, and certainly with the work that George and I have been doing, I've never encountered a negative influence. I know they're out there, but we haven't bumped into them.
It kind of reminded me of like a Ouija board, and how sometimes people think that they'll, come in contact with a negative spirit.
Well, if they expect to, they probably will.
Is it possible that the pendulum could be used for nefarious purposes?
Yeah, the pendulum is like a brick. I mean, you can build a house, or you can bash somebody's head in with it. The pendulum itself is neither innocent or guilty. It's a tool.
Well, let's move into Lindsay Higgins. Can you tell my audience who she is?
Lindsay Higgins is the daughter of a fairly well-known restaurant family in Shreveport, the Fertitta family, you may recall. And much of her life, as it turns out, Lindsay has been experiencing paranormal events, the earliest that she remembers, and this is a memory, it's nothing she was told, from about 2.5 years old, continuing into her adulthood. And in the Netflix series Haunted, season 1, episode 5, they chronicled Lindsay's story and gave a good presentation of her experience with some of these paranormal encounters, and in particular, encounters with what we would call extraterrestrials and UFO type craft. Lindsay, like so many people who have these kinds of experience, had no outlet for She couldn't really discuss it with her family, or were not able to work with her on some of the things she was describing that was happening as she was growing up. And she finally reached a point not too long after she got married that she can't sit on this anymore. It's got to come out. She's got to get this pressure relieved. And that's when she happened to listen to a certain podcast that was mentioning a Los Angeles production company that was looking for true stories of lifelong paranormal experiences for a possible Netflix series. And Lindsay said, that's it. That's the way I do this. So she wrote up a concise history of her life's experience and sent it off to this production company. And 14 hours later, she gets a call back from the producers wanting to set up a formal Skype interview, which was set up for the next day. And at the end of that, she got notification, oh yeah, you're going to be included in this. Now, do you know anybody else in Shreveport, Bossier City, Louisiana, who've had similar experiences or know about these type things? And that's when she asked a friend of hers, who was somewhat acquainted with her experiences, did she know somebody that Lindsay could contact? And I happen to be a friend of this individual. And she said, oh, you need to call George. And out of the blue one night, the telephone rings. And normally I wouldn't answer because they're usually junk calls. But I better take this one. So I did. And it's, hello, is this George Sewell? Yes. Oh, this is Lindsay Higgins. Joe Beth said I could talk to you. Oh, and what might we talk about? And so for 2 hours, I got the Lindsay Higgins story. And she went ahead and sent my information to the producers, and they got back with me and they wanted me to participate in her episode as well. So that's when Lindsay and I first met in person, was out near on location near Los Angeles for the filming of this episode. That's the first time we met face to face. And during this time is when Dan was often in Shreveport, Bossier area, working on material for his Paranormal Pendulum series. And I would be with him in various locations. And it became evident that this pendulum may be the best tool to investigate what the hell is going on with Lindsay. Because I'm not aware of that approach being used in other cases. So I introduced Dan to Lindsay and her husband, Tim, and everybody got along very well and said, okay, let's use the pendulum as our primary tool and see if we can find out what's going on with Lindsay Higgins. And we spent a little over 2 years researching, and the results are Paranormal Pendulum Book 3.
Now, has she been having alien contact since she was 2, or just, contact from the other side?
We include in the book the succinct story of her episode when she was 2.5, and I'll summarize it here, and Dan can chime in on the investigation part of it. Lindsay recounted being that young, and at that time, her father, who just loves railroads, had acquired an old railroad station downtown Shreveport, Central Station, and turned it into a really nice restaurant where the family lived upstairs and the restaurant downstairs. So when the restaurant was active and families downstairs, Lindsay would be in her room upstairs. And, well, it's got windows. She can look outside. It's a nice sunny day. And she would really like to go outside and play. And then some people approaching the restaurant from the outside suddenly see this little 2.5-year-old Lindsay walking around this big balcony. And so they alert the family inside. They rush up. And sure enough, the big window is open and Lindsay's gone out into the balcony. They bring her back in, close the window, try to figure out how the heck that window got open. And Lindsay, who opened the window? How did it get open? And, my friend Morlock opened it for me so I could go outside. Oh, okay. There's nobody upstairs. So that was our first acquaintance with one of Lindsay's spirit associates or friends, and a clear demonstration that from their side, they can manipulate physical objects. And when Dan was later in town, we were downtown checking on some historic sites. And I said, Dan, let's just go by Central Station. I want to see if anybody's there who may give some information about this story from Lindsay. And sure enough, there were 4 spirits who presented themselves, one of whom claimed that he was the Morlock that opened the window. Yes, that story was valid. And we asked by chance, was his remains in the nearby Oakland Cemetery, the oldest cemetery in Shreveport? And he said yes. And we were going to be there later that day and asked, well, would you be willing to show us your final resting place? And he said yes. And so that's began the hunt.
Did you ask Morlock if he knew Lindsay? And if so, what was he doing contacting her?
This turned into a
whodunit.
It turned into legitimately into a whodunit involving not only UFO abductions but reincarnation. We went to Oakland Cemetery, where we met up with we had interviewed a spirit earlier, just kind of off the cuff during our downtime, and we asked to meet him at the cemetery. And we wanted to go, pay our honors to his gravesite. Would you take us to your gravesite? He said yes. So we showed up that afternoon, met with this spirit at the cemetery. He took us to a gravesite, rather prominent, and it was not the grave of the guy we'd been interviewing. It was somebody else. At that point, we were literally handed off by one spirit to another spirit, and this spirit took us around the cemetery again using pendulum dowsing. Do I go left, right, north, south? Yes or no. Do I go 50 feet forward? Yes or no. Do I go 25 feet forward? Yes or no. That sort of thing. And we ended up at the top of the hill in the cemetery at a rather prominent, very old family memorial site for the W.D. Woodworth family. And throughout our research, I'm encapsulating a lot of research here, we determined that it was W.D. Woodworth and two daughters. They are reincarnated as Lindsay Higgins, her sister, and her father in this world, this plane. And that Morlock was actually a friend of W.D. Woodworth, who was basically a spirit assigned to kind of look after my girl for me.
Lindsay's father, when we got into this search, he became very interested because at the time he had kind of a suspicion that if in fact there was a spirit involved in the opening of a window event, that it was probably a person that he had been acquainted with as a child who was president of one of the railroads and had his office in that building. And he'd had a hunch that was the person who was Morlock. And it turned out that, yes, that individual was the Morlock who opened the window and had been asked by WD to kind of keep an eye on her.
Were all these spirits that you were talking to human spirits, or were there any spirits that were there that were non-human, still coming through from another dimension? We
had much contact with Pendulum and through our mediums with a key extraterrestrial who was the manager of what was happening to Lindsay. This goes back thousands of years. This turned out to be a long-term project that she agreed to participate in. And this individual was, we call him project manager, if you will, very highly evolved spirit, would be considered an extraterrestrial. But when our two mediums were able to get their impression of ET, it was something totally unexpected. And Dan, you want to pick that up with the great feelings with Lauren?
Yeah, we were doing a session. George, myself, Lauren, who was a medium, and a good friend of mine, Dave McMillan, who is very big in radio, but he's also a pendulum dowser himself. And we were at a park, I believe it's Mike Woods Park.
Mike Woods Park in Bossier.
Yeah, and we were doing a session, just investigating, trying to make contact with the spirit world. And all of a sudden, Lauren, says there's somebody here, somebody highly evolved. It's almost angelic. And she was seeing kind of a purple aura. And Laura and I were sitting side by side, and we both at the same time felt an overwhelming sense of love. Lauren called it mother love, but it was extremely strong. It's not something you can fake. It's not something you can suggest. It was just an overwhelming, powerful feeling of love beaming, at the whole group. And Lauren picked up on it, and then I picked up on it. In fact, if you read the transcript of that interview, you hear me going, "Oh, my goodness, I'm tearing up." It was that powerful.
Yeah. Towards the end of the session, I did ask E.T., is there any way you can present yourself to us? And that's what led Lauren to, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And at a later date, in another session with the other medium, Colleen, I asked specifically of her impressions of E.T., and she was very similar to what Lauren picked up. Very highly evolved soul, does not need a body or a craft to travel, just goes there and then constructs whatever is necessary. But indeed has been associated with Lindsay for a protracted length of time for a specific purpose. And that was not quite what anybody was expecting. But got lots of validation with this individual who we called E.T. And he said, okay, fine, it doesn't matter what you call me. So that was striking. What was happening with Lindsay was not accidental. It wasn't, I have a problem with the word abduction because that implies some sort of criminal intent. And that's not what was occurring. There was a lot of discomfort with what she was experiencing, but partially it was because she did not remember what was occurring. And some of the participants were unaware that what they were doing was causing her pain and discomfort. And part of the process was Lindsay reached a point where she could ask that if this is to continue, and it's evident that it will, that it be done without discomfort and pain. And they went, oh, well, of course. And ever since that particular moment, she reports that there have been contacts and visitation, so to speak, but there has been no discomfort whatsoever, other than maybe some markings on her skin just to let her know that, hey, we were here.
What procedures were being done that were causing pain?
Lindsay, from an early age forward, always complained of severe abdominal pain. And I think she was 9 or 10 and she was hospitalized. And I mean, every test in the battery was run to see if they could find some diagnosis for what was causing her this intense distress. And nothing. They could come up with nothing. The physicians were finally left with, well, her mother's dying of cancer and she's just doing this, for competition and get some attention. And of course, that's ludicrous. But it was principally abdominal pains. The purpose, as best we could determine, we didn't go off on many tangents in this investigation. We tried to stay focused on Lindsay because, my gosh, he could have gone so many places. But apparently, 6,000 years ago on a different plane, Lindsay, and we'll call him E.T., she agreed to participate in a long-term process. And she was asked to do this specifically because she will reincarnate. So the reincarnation apparently was a necessary component for what was being accomplished. And the end game, as best we could determine, was Lindsay's part of a process that will result in Homo sapiens having an average lifespan of 150 years rather than half that now, and that the sixth sense, the psychic ability, will be greatly enhanced. And when you think about it, that would be a pretty interesting planet to be on, to have that lifespan, but still have that sixth sense for immediate communication with all others. So that seems to be where this is going eventually.
Did you guys get any sense of what type of ET this was and where it was from?
We didn't go into that element so much. We did ask a couple of times if ET was to appear where we could visually see him, what would we see? And it was fairly consistent that we would see what is described in the literature as a Nordic, kind of a tall, light skin, long, kind of blonde hair, large blue eyes. But we never saw that. We just got that description a couple of times. As far as the location, we didn't pursue that. And what the mediums were coming up with is he's everywhere he wants to be.
Out of all this communication, what was the most astounding thing that you learned from ET?
Yeah, I got to think on that one.
Yeah,
pretty astonishing.
That's a whole nother book. I think not so much what we learned, but I think what we confirmed is something that you've heard of Jacques Vallée.
Yes.
And he came up with the phrase, it's all connected. And I think we have a confirmation that it is all connected. A good example, we're involved with Lindsay Higgins, which is a UFO abduction case. However, and I'm going to let George finish this up for me, but our involvement, once George and I started working on this case, all of a sudden people started popping into our spirit, our circle. For example, we had David and Lauren. David was a friend of mine. He was interviewing me on a radio program when I was doing Paranormal Pendulum 2. And Dave said, "Oh, by the way, I'm married to a medium. Oh, and I picked up Pendulum Dowsing. So maybe we can help out with you." George was hanging around with a lady by the name of Colleen Laborde, who happens to be a experiential medium. She got involved with it. George has some other friends and acquaintances that kind of popped in all of a sudden and started being interested in our situation. So all of a sudden, George and I had this team of business people, PhDs, paranormal people, pendulum dowsers, all of a sudden out of nowhere working on this same situation. And we discovered that this thing had been stage managed by someone on the other side. In fact, there's a chapter in the book called The Stage Manager. And with that, I'm going to let George kind of take over.
Yeah, there were quite a few adventures in this investigation. And one of the most prominent was there was a spirit, apparently, who was influencing all of these individuals and situations to occur in an organized way. And the way that this was presented was, at this time, I would frequently take an early morning walk from my house down to Mike Woods Park, go around the park, come back to the house, 3-mile walk, usually do it around dawn or whenever our first wake. And one particular morning in December, got down to the park, the baseball field had a nice frost on it. It's a real pretty scene. So I took a picture with my phone, posted it on Facebook as seen on this morning's stroll, and got a number of responses. "George, that's a great looking picture, but what's with the blue tennis ball?" What? I went and looked at the picture again, and sure enough, hovering above the field is a blue orb. And I said, "Whoa, well, that's got to be a lens artifact, from the rising sun or something." Didn't think too much of it, but continued my morning walks for the next several days, and then had an idea of, let me just recreate that photograph. So I'd go to the same spot, get the same frame, and just take a picture. I don't see anything, but lo and behold, in the picture, orbs started appearing in various locations, various colors, various densities. And this continued for a good half a dozen walks. And said, "Well, wait, this is no accident." So I sent them off to Dan and said, "Dan, take your pendulum and see if you can make sense of what this is. Something is definitely going on, and I'm not sure what." And Dan did. And he came back with, "Well, George, the orb is a spirit. It's a spirit known to you, but not in this lifetime." And of course, that got my curiosity up, because I really haven't done any past life type stuff. So, how would I find out? And then I had this idea. I need to look for 19th century American actresses. So I start searching on the internet, and one actress keeps popping up wherever I go, Kate Bateman. So I get my newspapers.com thing out, and I go and plow into Kate Bateman and whatnot, and find numerous articles and reviews of her performances. And it ultimately turned out that this was the way Kate introduced herself to the project. Had a specific session with Colleen to get Colleen's impressions of Kate. And we got just a boatload of information about Kate, her relationship to the team. We all know each other. We've been doing this stuff for thousands of years, that kind of stuff. And then we kind of learned that, yeah, she's kind of putting these things together. She put the idea in Lindsay's mind, and now's the time to come out. She saw to it that Lindsay tuned into that particular podcast, that she called specifically Joe Beth, knowing that Joe Beth would, referred Lindsay to me. So there was just such an unfolding. And it was the work of Kate Bateman.
You brought up something interesting, that you guys have been working together for thousands of years. And so are you saying you and
presented to Colleen?
And are you saying you and Dan have been working together? Do you feel like you guys are in a spirit group reincarnating over and over again?
That's what they tell us.
Yeah, and it makes sense.
How did you guys get connected in this lifetime?
That's all George's fault. George was from George and I have known each other since about 1975?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. We were young whippersnappers. And George formed a film group called the Scotch and Cinema Society. And the idea was you go sip some very good scotch and you watch some very good top quality movies. And a friend of mine suggested that I call George because I was looking for something to do. I called George on the telephone and he was forming this society. So I joined up. I was one of the first members to join his society. And, we've been stuck together ever since. He can't get rid of me no matter how hard he tries. I mean, I moved 1,200 miles away and I'm still hanging around.
Since the ET is like a project manager, are there any other cases in Northwest Louisiana that have also come available of ET contact? Not that
I'm aware of or that we've looked into. I'm sure they're there. We haven't been connected with the experiencers.
One of the things about this book is that we had to stay focused for this book. We had to stay focused completely on the Lindsay story as much as possible. Otherwise, we would still be researching. There's so many tangents we could have followed. We could be researching from now on. So we stayed focused right on Lindsay's story for this book.
Is Lindsay still in contact with ET today?
I haven't spoken with Lindsay lately about the subject, but not too long ago, she did let me know that there was a visitation the previous night, and she got that from some spots that she had on her arm. Of course, her husband's totally oblivious to whatever occurred. And one thing we found out that these visitations, sometimes they're physical. Whatever's being done, it needs to be physical. But other times, it doesn't have to be physical. It's more astral or spiritual. So visitation may or may not involve a physical event. It may involve something more like in a dreamlike state. So it's very comprehensive, very comprehensive.
Did Lindsay ever mention that her eggs were harvested and potentially she has alien hybrid children?
There's a chapter in the book where we did explore her suspicion that she had hybrid children. And the spirit of her favorite aunt, Aunt Belle, provided a great deal of information. Lindsay was very close to Belle when Lindsay was growing up, and Belle was informing Lindsay through the Pendulum that yes, she did have, I believe, 2 hybrid children, and Lindsay could think back to 2 episodes of memories where the procedures that would do that were likely the focus of the event. So there was a little bit of confirmation in her memory that this could have happened, and she suspected it happened. And Belle said, yes, it did happen. You do have these 2 hybrid children. You have met them, but you don't remember that you met them. And we're not quite sure what that was about. But it was satisfaction for Lindsay that, okay, my suspicion is true, that this did happen. I do have 2 hybrid children.
Was she ever taken to an alien base on Earth?
If she was, she doesn't remember, and we didn't proceed in that direction. The Netflix episode has a wonderful recreation of a major event that occurred when she was a sophomore in college, and that's basically a massive light comes in through a window into her room where she's staying, literally grabs her and begins pulling her out of the room. There's a ceiling fan, and she grabs the ceiling fan from above, trying to prevent being moved, and then it just snaps and jerks her out. and into a very prominent craft that went off to a specific location for whatever the physical work that was going to be done at that time. But that did occur, and the Netflix gives a pretty good recreation of that particular event. And Dan and I interviewed Lindsay in that house, not that particular room. The room has been since demolished, but the house. And every element that is presented in the Netflix thing, I mean, some of the procedures are a little different, but the event is pretty well presented. And it was an actual occurrence, physically remembered.
Were the markings on her skin like puncture wounds, or what did they look like?
In the Netflix episode, they have some illustrations of like geometric shapes, like blue color, pink color, circles, squares, triangles, and that's the way Lindsay describes it. And sometimes she'll have not punctures, but little red spots. And she's interpreting this as there might have been a piece of machinery that was attached, say, to her arm, and those were just the points of contact. But as far as being punctured, they weren't punctures. And these would fade. If she woke up in the morning and had the spots on her arm or one of these geometric shapes, it's gone within 3-4 hours.
In your communication with E.T., does he have a message for humanity in general?
We never got, special, this is a message for all mankind. We never got that.
All right.
Yeah, I think the only thing we can say out of that is that based on the information that this has been an ongoing program for 6,000 years, is that there are a lot of different types of entities very involved in improving the status of mankind on planet Earth.
And everybody's involved, spirits, what we would call extraterrestrials. I mean, we're all part of the same process. I guess that would be the message, so to speak, is that life is much grander than most folks would consider. And that grandness makes it a whole lot more fun.
One interesting thing about Lindsay's case is George and I could have stopped with the typical abduction scenario. I mean, that plays out like many of them have ever since Betty and Barney Hill. But continuing research, and particularly continuing research with the pendulum, all of a sudden we discovered, hey George, we got ghosts involved in this thing, and we got angels involved in this thing, and we got people who are moving pieces around the chessboard, and we're some of the pieces. There's a lot more going on here. And so, the more we researched it, we didn't stop at any one particular point. Okay, she's been abducted. Good story. We kept working, and the more we worked, the more information we got. The more information we got, the more we worked.
After all this research on Lindsay and your communication with E.T., did it change your perspective on life at all? And did it change the way you live your life? And if so, how?
I wouldn't say, at least in my case, that it so much changed as it absolutely confirmed. Like Dan and I are having a pendulum session with Lindsay. We're talking with Lindsay, getting information. At the same time, we're using the pendulum to converse with Lindsay's previous life, where she was Sally Murph. So we're communicating with two components of Lindsay, one in the physical, one in the spiritual, simultaneously. And that confirmed that, yes, indeed, the soul can express in multiple ways simultaneously. That really broadens just how complex and significant the soul is. Another was the reality of what we were doing. And by that, I mean, about halfway through the process, I was getting I'm a natural skeptic, of course. Just looking at this is just almost too easy. I mean, everything just coming together, click, 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 all these people coming in together. Everything is just, I was getting just a little suspicious that we might be influencing what we're doing, because we try not to do that. Really. So I got a little, is this really what's happening? Is this really the truth? And so the next morning, 7 a.m., I get up, yay, go into my living room, open up the blinds to get ready for the soon to rise sun, let the light come in. And across the street, hovering above my neighbor's house, is a 20-foot diameter yellow orangish sphere. And I'm looking at this sucker saying, whoa, wait a minute. And I'm studying it. And I can see the pre-dawn lights of the rising sun in the distance. Below the sphere is the street light, and it's got a light pollution bulb. So it's casting kind of an orangey yellow light, similar to the color of the sphere. But the circumference of the sphere was not firm. It was like a painter would feather, painting. It's kind of shimmering. It's got a little bit of activity to it. And it was just the most fascinating thing. I studied that sucker. And, well, what did George do next? Step outside and look at it, grab my phone, get a picture of it. No, I went and fed the cats. Made a cup of coffee, walked back by the window, looked out the window, sphere's gone, and then it clicked. Whoa, hello. I was given a taste of what in the field is called alien apathy. And that's a term that's used to describe a person who's having an encounter or an experience, but the way they react to it is different from what they would expect or someone else would expect. And having had that little taste, I understood now the subtlety of the communication process with ETs, and by extension, I suppose, to the other spirits. Later that evening, when I was really just pondering I wasn't sure all this is real, and this is in your face. Yes, it's real, George. But the phrase to describe the whole encounter came to me, and that was diplomatic reveal. And that's a very precise description of what that event was. So that kind of eliminated any doubt of the factual nature of the involvement of extraterrestrials, these other levels of spirits. It's there in the story.
Dan, have you had any contact like that, either with this case or any other case?
Yeah, I went through psychics are some of the most skeptical people in the world because they deal with so much falsehood all the time. And I was going through the same thing. This is so damn easy. And so you're familiar with Dr. Stephen Greer?
Yes.
Okay. He has a technique of basically making contact with the ET. And I said, I'm going to try that. That's one of the things that has come out of this thing. I can't abide a mystery. I've got to know what's going on. And excuse me, I decided to employ Greer's technique, which is basically meditation, sending out positive friendship messages telepathically, and then asking for a show. And I go out camping by myself quite a bit, and I go way, way out. I'm out in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and I'm out way where there's nobody around. There are no light sources, roads, streets, farms, any light sources for 20, 30, 40 miles. And I practiced the technique. And one time in New Mexico, it's worked 5 out of 5 times so far. But once in New Mexico, I did my meditation, and telepathically I just sent out, "Hey, I love everybody," and then telepathically, "Would you guys please show up?" So I'm sitting there looking to the north, and all of a sudden there's a bright flash about the size of imagine your little fingernail held out at arm's length, about that size, brilliant white flash. 2 or 3 seconds later, there's another brilliant white flash. And then 2 or 3 seconds later, there's a huge arc, brilliant white arc streaking across the sky between the 2 points, almost like an upside down smiley face. Just, brilliant. And in a minute, that went by. And a minute later, a brilliant yellow globe just popped into the sky above where that had happened. And it hung there for a couple of minutes. Almost, I felt like it was saying, "You got it now? You understand? You see?" So, things like that. It can't be a coincidence when you meditate on something and you ask for something to happen, and then something happens over and over and over and over again. So, stuff is going on. We don't know what, but stuff is going on.
Dan, do you have a pendulum there that you can show us?
Oh, yeah. It's just a rock on a string. And, I'm manipulating this now, but I can make it go to the right. I can stop it. I can make it go to the left. But when I do my work, I leave it alone and I let the subconscious mind direct it.
When you're using it, do you ever stop it with the other hand and then ask the question, or you just hold it still and then ask the question?
Normally I hold it still and then I'll ask a question, and then I'll stop and let it swing, let it settle down, and then I'll ask the next question. But yeah, sometimes I'll stop it. It just depends. But I do stop the motion between every question. And sometimes you'll one of the techniques you learn in practicing it is sometimes the answer is no, but it'll start out with a yes, and then if you keep your mind clear, it'll go back to the proper answer, which is no. Interesting story. About how you can affect the pendulum. When I'm doing my missing person work, and I learned this the hard way, the most obvious question is the missing child still alive? Because that gives you a whole bunch of information to work with. And I always got a yes answer. And then, a week later, we would find out that the child, was deceased. And at the time I did the reading, the child had been deceased, or the missing man or the woman had been deceased. I continued doing that for a long time, and I would always get the same answer. Is the missing person alive? I get a yes. And turned out the missing person at the time I asked the question was deceased. And finally the light, there he is. Finally the light popped back on in my head. And I realized, life goes beyond the physical body. I believe in life after death. Therefore, I was getting the correct answer. The dead person in spirit was still alive. So I was asking the wrong question. Of course, the person is alive because that person has moved on to the next realm. It's only the physical body that we were looking for that is dead. So now, when I'm looking for a missing person, I've modified the question: is this missing person physically alive? And you get you get much more accurate answers because it's all in how you ask the question. You're going to get an answer. Make sure you ask the question so that you get the information that you can actually use.
Were any other modalities used with your research with Lindsay besides the pendulum and medium, like hypnotherapy or anything else?
She did not. Yeah, I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. I can legally hang out a shingle for hypnotherapy. I don't. I just wanted to learn the information. And she did not want to be hypnotized, and we didn't push the issue. I would love to do that, but it's something she doesn't want to do, and she's uncomfortable. We're not going to go there.
Why do you choose using the pendulum over hypnotherapy?
For me, the pendulum provides accurate yes or no answers right away. Again, you have to follow up and do multiple sessions, but there's no guesswork with the pendulum. In terms of hypnotherapy, I just wanted to learn the technique. It's not something that I practice. I mean, I could do it in a session, but we just don't do it.
George, is Lindsay currently employed?
Oh, yeah. Very active in her family life and activities. So she's a perfectly normal, active young woman.
I guess the ET contact doesn't really interfere with her day-to-day life then.
Not really. Not really. And what Lindsay was wanting to accomplish when she came out, so to speak, was to let other people know who may be in a similar situation that it's okay to talk about it. So she got just buku phone calls and emails and other communications from people all across the country who saw the episode on Netflix and were so moved by it that they responded. And so she has a lot of contacts with people who have had similar experiences to reassure them that you're not the only one, and there may be a method to the madness, so to speak.
Once Lindsay got that pain element of her experience or her contact removed, does she now view the experience overall as positive or negative?
Positive, with the perspective that she got participating in this 2 years. It wasn't an abduction as a criminal act, just walking down the street, they just get you. None of that at all. All this is very planned. It's progressive. It's a long-term process. As she put it, well, if I agreed to do it, then by golly, I'm going to do it. I mean, that's her position now, that I said I'd do it. Okay, this is what's involved in doing it. All right, let's continue. Let's just take away the pain. And that seems to be the case.
All right, if people want to buy the book, do they find it on your websites, on Amazon, or both?
It's wherever you buy your books. It's on Amazon. It's an ebook. It's in paperback. It's through Barnes and Noble. Wherever you buy your book, if you don't have it, you can order it.
If people want to reach out to you and contact you, what's the best way to do so?
Go to the website. You can go to George has websites and I have websites, and also my email address is on the websites.
Mm-hmm. All right. Can you tell us what your websites are?
Yeah, okay. Mine is. You go ahead, George.
Well, for me, it's real simple. www.georgesewell, Sewell. Be sure that middle initial is in there. Otherwise, you'll go to a New York fellow. Nice person, I suppose, but not me. .com.
Yeah, mine, I have www.danbaldwin.com and www.fournightspress.com. And that's FOURKNIGHTS, fournightspress.com. And my email address is baldco@msn.com. That's BALDCO@msn.com.
All right. Are you guys working on anything else that you want us to know about?
Oh, yeah.
Four.
Yeah, we're doing something interesting. George and I are fascinated. We kept running into Native Americans and their contact with what they call the sky people. And George is over there in the heart of the mound building culture, ancient Native American mound building culture. I'm out here west in the ancient Native American cliff dwelling cultures. And so we're now conducting research into the Native Americans and the sky people from two very widely different perspectives. And we don't know where it's going, but it's going to be interesting.
Are you interviewing Native Americans about this?
I am actively interviewing deceased Native Americans. I'm going right to the source. I go to I go way out there, and way out there are a lot of cliff dwellings and sacred sites and storage facilities and all kinds of places. And I sit down and conduct an interview like we did with the book. With this book, I just conduct interviews with the Native American spirits who are there. And I use my pendulum and I record the session and I just hold a conversation.
Yeah, in the current book, Paranormal Pendulum Book 3, we got the transcript of a session with me and Dan at a place called Poverty Point in Northeast Louisiana, which is a World Heritage Site, a very ancient, major trading center. And we made contact with a person who lived there 4,000 years ago, who was, to use our terms, was a medicine man, and was sort of a go-between between the population there at Poverty Point and the sky people who would visit from time to time. And the connection that's in the book is that Lindsay, in a previous incarnation, was an apprentice of this medicine man. So that was kind of a connection why we went that direction in this particular book. But that's also a launching pad for what Dan just described is, okay, well, we had more conversations with this individual. And there's some sites in Shreveport and Bossier area that apparently have been populated for thousands upon thousands of years. And we're going to be checking out some of those to see what kind of interaction there was with the sky people, as they're referred to. And we're going to see where it goes.
Is the Shreveport, Bossier area generally a hotbed for paranormal activity?
I'm going to have to say yes. One thing we did discover was there are at least two portals for for transit from other dimensions. So one was located very close to the property where Lindsay grew up. And so that explains a lot of her visual sightings of craft as well as individuals. And while we were at Mike Wood Park in Bossier, which is adjacent to Barksdale Air Force Base at the southern end of the runway, and in communication with ET, we were informed that there's a portal over Barksdale that was specifically constructed in the late 19th century so that others could observe and view and get an understanding of Homo sapiens who were about to take flight. So that was what we got as to why that particular portal was constructed at that time. So with all the activity, there's a lot going on here. And to kind of emphasize that, and in the book, we have a story from Lindsay's father, Joe, who told us that back in the 1980s, Lindsay's maternal uncle was in the Air Force. He was stationed at Barksdale. And one evening, the uncle brought his young son out to the Fertitta property, and he pointed up in the sky and said, "Okay, that's where you look." And then there was what we would call a UFO appeared, and they're observing it, and then it goes away, and the uncle says to his son, "Okay, now you've seen it, but you can't ever talk about it." So that gave credence to the portal being at that location and a place where one could access some sort of contact with the whomevers that are going in and out of it.
With all of your research, do you guys think that ETs are here for good, or do you think that there are some here for nefarious reasons?
You got good people, you got nefarious people.
Yeah, so far, the only ones we've come in contact with are very apparent to us, very good people. I'm not saying that there aren't bad people out there, but the ones we've contacted, are good folks.
Yeah, we're not interested in the bad people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we George and I keep coming into contact with positive beings is that's what we look for. You know, we're not looking for demonic activity. We're not out there to try to be scared or to scare somebody else. We want information. We want to talk to people who want to talk to us, whether they're ET people or deceased people or whatever. You know, we go looking for a positive experience, and I think that pays itself back to us time and time and time again.
And they love to talk.
Oh boy.
Well, I like how you put it earlier that if you're looking for negative entities, that's what you're going to find. And if you're looking for the opposite, that's what you'll find.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, it's like if you're going into again, I use this terminology all the time. If you're going into a haunted house, you're still going into somebody's house or their place of business or a place that was important to them. You should show that space and the people who occupied that space all the respect and courtesy in the world, and it'll come back for you.
Interesting. How do you do that?
If I came over to your house,
Mm-hmm.
I would not grab you by the collar and say, "Tell me what's going on."
Yeah.
I demand that you tell me what happened here. How would you react?
Right.
Okay, now let's say, all right, say you're deceased. It's 100 years from now. You're deceased. I come over to your house and I've got my pendulum, my crystal ball, or whatever, my REM pod or whatever. Tell me what's going on in your house. Tell me what happened.
Right. So
how would you respond?
All right, that makes sense. You can't go into the space demanding answers.
Yeah. You would be the first one to say, "Get out."
Well,
again, if I came over and said, "Hey, I'm here. I respect you. I respect your place. I would like to have a conversation. Will you please have a conversation with me?" What's your reaction more likely to be?
And it sounds like from what you said earlier, most of these beings are happy to talk.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, before we finish up, can one of you leave us with one last positive message?
Life is a lot more fun than you imagined.
That's a great message. Guys, thank you so much for being my guest. I really appreciate you both coming on and sharing with me today, and I wish you success in whatever you're doing.
Loved it. Enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.